Peter, it's a real privilege to be here talking to you today. Now, it must feel very surreal. We're talking just hours after you stood on that stage to accept the RTS award, and just within a few weeks of being in detention in Egypt. Has your release sunk in as yet?
It has sunk in. What hasn't sunk in is just quite what all of this seems to mean to a lot of people. You know, the RTS award was truly extraordinary. This was a massive event. It's one thing to get a lot of support and encouragement from ordinary people, and I am incredibly moved and honoured by that. But this was a recognition, but from our peers, and you know, as I think anyone knows, it's your professional colleagues, the opinion of your professional colleagues that really make a difference. So to be honoured there was really extraordinary.
You've gone into that situation which, of course, journalists feel very strange about, which is suddenly being the story you are.
I'm not supposed to be here, I'm supposed to be where you are.
But you've become much more than Peter Greste even. You're now, obviously, the figurehead for press freedom. How does that feel?
Yeah, perhaps not figurehead, but certainly we've come to represent something bigger. Look, in a way, this has been a part of the process of applying meaning to this. One of the things that we realised was, as the issue of press freedom started to take hold, as the campaign to get us out started to spread, we realised that this was bigger than any one of us individually. And that gave us enormous strength, partly because we knew that there were so many people on our side, but also because we really felt that we were standing up for a much bigger principle, a higher principle. And so I'm very comfortable, I'm very happy to be an advocate, to be seen as being an advocate, because it helps make the whole experience valuable. As I said, it gives it a meaning, and that's been really, really helpful.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the start of this experience, because I understand you'd only been in Egypt for a few days in December 2013 when you were detained on these charges. Are you any clearer now as to what these charges actually related to, or how they came about?
Look, all I can tell you is what the charges were themselves. You know, that we were accused of working with the Muslim Brotherhood, of basically being propagandists, but there was no evidence. We knew that we hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, quite the opposite. I had been playing it very, very conservatively. As you said, I'd only just arrived in Egypt. I'm not an Egypt expert. I was filling in over the Christmas and New Year period. And as any journalist, any responsible journalist in that position would, you don't push boundaries. You play it reasonably safe until your radar adjusts and you understand where the limits lie. You play it with a very straight bat, and so that's what we've been doing. And so to find ourselves under arrest was a real shock. But throughout the process, because we were so confident of our innocence, because we were so confident that there was no evidence, I never really felt panicked by it. We knew it was serious, but I never really believed that we'd be convicted.
Yes, some of the evidence that was brought up at your trial seemed very odd indeed. How much did you actually understand of the proceedings as they were going on in the court?
I had a translator throughout, so I was following fairly closely.
But when it came to that final verdict, I mean, that obviously came as a shock to many Muslims.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, there are plenty of observers who monitored the trial. You've spoken about some of the evidence yourself. Clearly there wasn't anything there. I mean, we always expected to have to defend our journalism, to explain why we spoke to the people we did and why we used the form of words that we did, why we edited stories in the way that we did. It never came up in the trial, and so we always felt that, you know, there was nothing to convict us on. So when we were convicted, it was a massive shock. We always thought too that maybe there'd be a need that we would perhaps be convicted and serve time and be sentenced as time served and released immediately. So, as I said, to find ourselves with 7-year sentences was a massive blow.
And then how did you keep yourself going mentally and physically during that time in jail?
I realised very quickly that in prison you lose all sense of autonomy. You have no control over your life. What you do have control over narrows to your own physical self. And there is always a danger. There's a physical issue, there's also a mental issue, and you need to assert control over the things that you can control. What I was concerned about was more than anything else was my own head. If there's something that's going to kind of fall apart. It's your own state of mind, and so what we realized we needed to do was to keep physically, mentally, and spiritually fit. And so I spent a lot of time meditating just to try and keep perspective, keep my head level and rational and stable. We organised a physical fitness program. We had a corridor out just outside the prison, outside my cell, particularly at the last prison we were in, where I would just literally run up and down the corridor for 40-45 minutes a day. I was able to, once after our conviction, I was able to convince the prison authorities to allow in some study materials, and I started a master's degree in international relations. And we did it the old-fashioned way with paper, academic, literally hard paper copies of academic papers, essays. I wrote the essays out in longhand with the paper and pencil, and I also, just to take care of my intellectual health. So physically, spiritually, intellectually, tried to make a very deliberate effort to stay stable and strong.
Oh, I'm sure there must have been many dark times, but I understand there was a certain amount of humour as well. One of your colleagues was telling us at Sky News that you set up a radio station in the prison.
Yeah, in the cells, you need to converse, you need to communicate, and so we would, bellow down the corridors at night and talk and share news and so on. It was part of the routine. It was part of the way of keeping connected.
And of course, during your time in prison, there was this campaign to free you going on around the world. How aware were you of that, and what kind of a difference?
Not as aware as you might have thought. I mean, we knew what was going on, obviously. We would get regular visits from the embassy, from my family, from our families, and they'd all bring in snippets of news. They'd bring in bits of gossip and so on, and they'd tell us stories about what was going on. And I remember my parents several times saying, "Look, you really don't understand how big this thing is getting outside, how many people are really following it, and how much people have invested in this case." And I said, well, I kind of humoured them and said, "Yeah, of course I don't understand." But in my own mind, I felt, look, I'm a journalist. Of course I get it. And it's only been now that I'm out that I've had a look at what's been happening, that I've seen the photographs and the demos and the tweets. I mean, literally millions of tweets and Facebook messages, millions. It's been staggering to see how many people really cared about this, what this meant to people. And I think, as much as I'd like to think it was about us, I also recognise that it was because of what we came to represent. We came to represent an idea that I think people understand is very, very important to a properly functioning society, and that's freedom of speech. And they saw in us a very clear-cut, what they felt was a very clear-cut example of an attempt to silence the press.
Now, one of your co-detained has spoken to us on Sky News about the fact that he felt the three of you were being used as pawns between Qatar and Egypt as part of that dispute there. Is that something you'd agree with?
Look, I don't want to get into the politics of this. I've got my own views about it, but I think that clearly some of the bigger political issues were involved, but at the end of the day, I still think that this was about freedom of speech.
And ultimately, your release, when it came, was a surprise, I'm sure, to you as well, to everybody else. Are you any clearer about how that came about?
Not really, no. On the day that I was released, I was actually going to speak to my brother about where we go from there. I was fully expecting, I was consciously preparing for another 6 months, if not 6 years in prison. And so I went out for a run that morning, and one of the officers came and said, "Look, the boss wants to speak to you." So I went over, sort of panting and sweating from my run, and he said, "Pack your gear, you're going." And I said, "Well, going where? You're moving me to another prison?" He said, "No, the embassy's coming in an hour, you're going home." I thought, oh my God, it really didn't sink in. I went and spoke to my colleagues, told them what was going on, They were obviously overjoyed. It was pretty tough, you know, because obviously we discussed this. We knew there was always a possibility that one of us would be freed and that the others would stay behind. And we also agreed that the best thing would be for them, for that person to go, rather than dig their heels in and try and stay out of solidarity. But by crikey, when you've spent 400 days in a cell with them, you get to know them, you get pretty close to them, and leaving them behind in prison was very, very tough.
Yeah, I mean, that was very clear when you arrived in Australia finally, and you emphasised the fact that they were still left behind and still seeking for freedom. The new trial starts within the next few days. Are you confident that perhaps justice will be done this time round?
Again, I don't want to comment on the trial itself. It is an ongoing case, and I can't really get involved with that too much. But you know, I am encouraged by the fact that my colleagues have been released on bail. The judicial process is ongoing, though. We believe that the Court of Cassation, the court that reviewed our case and ordered, suspended our sentences, our convictions, and ordered the retrial, in its writ said very clearly that the prosecution had failed to prove the case. We don't believe there is evidence, and I'm fairly confident that if due process is done, then we will be vindicated, but it's up to the court to make that decision.
Have you spoken to either of them since they've been
Yeah, I've
released
spoken to both of them.
And how are they doing?
Oh, they're really good. I mean, they're obviously as concerned as I am about the ongoing trial, but just absolutely delighted to be able to be at home with their families. That's really what matters.
When did it sink into you that you actually were free?
You know, the first few days were very quiet. There was no ceremony when I was released. I flew to Larnaca in Cyprus, had a few quiet days with my brother on the beach. You know, we went for some walks, we had a talk and so on. And it was all, I mean, absolutely low key. There was no ceremony, no song and dance, no great reception. And you know, I thought, well, okay, this is how it'll be. And it was really only when I walked into the arrivals hall back in Brisbane, and I saw this unbelievable reception. Was just mind-blowing. The numbers of people that had turned up, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, no less, to welcome me home was just extraordinary. And that was the moment when I thought, okay, this really is a new phase in my life.
And what are you planning to do with this new phase? Because you've talked about perhaps going on as a foreign correspondent.
Yeah, look, I'm a journalist, I'm a correspondent. It's what I do, it's what I've been doing for the past 20 years, and I don't want to walk away from that. The fundamental reasons why I got into this business haven't changed. I love being able to indulge my curiosity. I love being able to tell these stories. I think what we do is important and valuable, and I want to keep doing it. It doesn't, whether that, I don't think it might not necessarily go back to my old job as East Africa correspondent, but I still want to keep reporting in some form. But I also know that we've been so tightly identified with freedom of expression, with freedom of the press, that to my mind it makes a lot of sense to continue with that in a role as an advocate. Again, in quite what form that takes, I don't know, but I'm also interested in that.
And how do your family feel about the fact that you want to remain in the field, even if in a different role?
Yeah, my brother said, if this happens again, mate, you're on your own. You know, look, they know. And my mum smacked me over my head and said, don't do it again, son. But she also knows that, and you know, my parents have always raised us. They've always said that we need to do what we need to do, follow what we believe in. I don't think she'd be overly happy if we started doing too much of the work, too much frontline work. But I think they recognise the importance of it. They know it's important to me.
But has this made you look at the role of a foreign correspondent in a different way?
You're going to have to ask me again in a few weeks' time. I think it's only been 2.5 weeks. But look, what we do I think is important, is valuable. Every correspondent, every journalist who ever goes into a story where there's a degree of risk makes those calculated choices about the risks involved and makes a judgment about whether they're prepared to take those risks. We made a judgment in going to Egypt. We knew that you know, there are issues there, just as I have every other time that I've gone into any other front line. And you know, if things happen, things happen. That's a part of the job. That hasn't changed, and I respect everyone who continues to make those choices. I'll need to make those choices as and when they come up.
Yeah, it's very early to be asking you about this, but could you ever see yourself returning to Egypt in the future?
I don't know at this point. As I said, it's much too early to say.
I bet it is. So immediate plans then, because I know you've had a whirlwind few weeks since your release, and you're sitting here very jet-lagged and with many events ahead. What are your immediate plans?
Immediate plans, I've got quite a lot of talking to do, a lot of people to catch up with, an awful lot of people to say thank you to. So many of my professional colleagues really invested an awful lot of time and energy in supporting us, and you know, so many of my old colleagues here in London, the people that I spent time with at the BBC, others who backed us, all of them I need to see to say thank you to, and so that's a big part of the job. That's a big part of the things I'm planning on doing over the next few days and weeks, and then as soon as I possibly can, a bit of downtime, because boy oh boy has it been busy, and I could do with a bit of a break.
Well, Peter Greste, it's been wonderful to be able to sit here and talk to you in the flesh. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.